Hollywood sold you the Lone Ranger as a masked white hero saving the day. The banned truth is shocking. The real Lone Ranger was black, and 19 other black legends were erased from history. Enslaved cowboys, betrayed sharpshooters, lynched outlaws, and forgotten explorers who built the West while white people stole the credit. Discover 20 real facts that show black people as the true tough guys of the Old West, dying in pathetic or brutal ways. Number 1. You know the Lone Ranger, right? That masked Old West hero we grew up watching. Well, the real man behind that legend was black. Bass Reeves was born enslaved in 1838 and escaped during the Civil War. In 1875, he became a federal deputy in the Arkansas Territory, at a time when that seemed impossible for someone like him. For 3 decades, he arrested more than 3,000 criminals in the most dangerous lands in the country. His method was clever. He'd disguise himself as a beggar or a preacher to get close to the outlaws before capturing them. He spoke indigenous languages and had aim that became legendary among outlaws. Even so, when he died in 1910 in Muskogee, Oklahoma, he was basically broke. Hollywood took his story, made the hero white, and the real Lone Ranger was erased from the books for decades. Bass Reeves just rewired your Lone Ranger memory? I put together a few deep-dive dossiers on key Old West figures and left the link in the first comment. If you're the kind of person who won't settle for the cleaned-up, shallow version of these stories, this is for you. No fluff, just what Hollywood skips. Number 2. Bill Pickett, the cowboy who tamed bulls with his teeth. Have you ever seen someone take down a bull using their mouth? Bill Pickett really did that. Born in 1870 in Texas, the son of former slaves, he spent his childhood watching bulldog dogs handle wild cattle. He had a crazy idea. Why not do the same? That's how bulldogging was born, a technique where Pickett grabbed the steer by the horns, twisted its neck, and bit the animal's lip until it went down. It worked. The guy became a big deal in American rodeos and traveled with the famous Wild West shows across Europe and South America. But here's the hard part. Even though he was a star, hotels refused to let him stay because of his skin color. Pickett never stopped. He kept working with horses to the end. In April 1932, at 61 years old, a wild stallion trampled him on a ranch in Oklahoma. He died doing what he'd done his whole life. Number 3. Nat Love, the cowboy who was born in chains and died forgotten. You've probably never heard of him, but Nat Love was one of the most skilled cowboys of the Old West. He was born enslaved in Tennessee in 1854, and when the Civil War ended, he was only 11 years old with not a penny in his pocket. At 15, he set off alone for Texas and got a job breaking wild horses, the kind nobody wanted to get near. He faced shootouts, survived attacks by Native Americans, and rode thousands of miles driving cattle. In 1876, at a rodeo in Deadwood, South Dakota, he won every competition and earned the nickname Deadwood Dick. He wrote his own autobiography telling these stories. But time wasn't kind. He died in 1921 at 66, working as a train porter in Los Angeles, basically forgotten. Number 4. Bose Ikard. You probably know Lonesome Dove, right? Well, the character Josh Dietz was based on this man. Bose Ikard was born enslaved in Mississippi in 1843, but his story took a turn few could ever imagine. After the Civil War, he became the right-hand man of Charles Goodnight, one of the biggest ranchers in Texas. Goodnight trusted no one the way he trusted Bose. On the most dangerous cattle drives in the West, Bose was the one out front, dealing with thieves, hostile Indians, and unknown terrain. One time, he even saved his boss's life during an attack. Goodnight, a tough man of few words, said Bose was better than any white cowboy he'd ever known. When Bose died in 1929 at 85, Goodnight paid for his headstone and wrote the epitaph himself. Number 5. Mary Fields, known as Stagecoach Mary. Did you know the first black person to have a mail route in the United States was a woman nearly 5 feet 11 inches who carried a revolver and never missed a delivery? Mary Fields was born enslaved in Tennessee around 1832. After the Civil War, she worked at a convent in Ohio until a nun friend got sick in Montana. Mary went to help and never went back. At 60, when most people were already retired, she got the job as a stagecoach driver because she was the only applicant who could hitch up 6 horses in record time. For 8 years, she delivered mail in conditions that would make any man think twice. Wolves, thieves, heavy blizzards. Nothing stopped her. When the stagecoach got stuck in the snow, she carried the mail on her back. Mary died in 1914 at 82 in Cascade, Montana. Number 6. Cherokee Bill. Have you ever heard of the outlaw who laughed at his own execution? Crawford Goldsby, known as Cherokee Bill, had black and Cherokee blood running through his veins. At just 18, he was already the most wanted man in Oklahoma Territory. Between 1894 and 1895, this kid terrorized trains, robbed stores, and faced the law without blinking. Authorities pinned 13 killings on him, including a jail guard during an escape attempt. Judge Isaac Parker, famous for sentencing outlaws to death, personally handled the case. In March 1896, at 20 years old, Cherokee Bill walked up to the gallows in Fort Smith, Arkansas. When they asked if he had any last words, he said, "I came here to die, not to make a speech." Seconds later, he dropped through the trap door. The most feared guy in the Old West didn't live to see 21. Number 7. Isom Dart. Born into slavery around 1849, this man built one of the most unlikely paths in the Old West. After the Civil War, he headed to Wyoming and started stealing horses. The interesting part? He could vanish completely. He'd change his name, alter his look, and disappear like smoke. Bounty hunters were left clueless. For a while, he lived among native tribes, learning survival skills few white men knew. That kept him alive for decades in a territory where black men faced extra danger. But every streak ends. In October 1900, at 51, Tom Horn, one of the most feared hired guns of the time, ambushed him on Cold Spring Mountain. 2 clean shots ended the story of a man who spent his whole life getting away. Number 8. George McJunkin was born enslaved in Texas in 1851, but after the Civil War, he built a completely different life in New Mexico, working as a cowboy. He was self-taught. He taught himself to read, play the violin, and study geology. In 1908, while riding near Folsom, he noticed something strange in a ravine after a flood. Huge bones mixed with spear points made by human hands. McJunkin spent years trying to convince scientists to look into his discovery, but few took a formerly enslaved black man seriously. He died in 1922 without seeing any recognition for what he'd found. Only years later, researchers confirmed that the site proved humans were in the Americas more than 10,000 years ago, completely rewriting what we knew about the continent's history. Number 9. Jim Beckwourth was born enslaved in Virginia in 1798, but he gained his freedom and ended up in the mountains out west as a fur trapper. He found a key pass in the Sierras that helped thousands of pioneers make it to California. But the wildest part of his story is something else. The Crow didn't just accept Beckwourth into the tribe, they made him a war chief. He fought alongside them, married Crow women, and lived for years as one of them. Now, here's the twist nobody saw coming. When he died in 1866 at 68, people say the Crow themselves may have poisoned him. Why? Some historians believe it was an honor ritual to keep his spirit with the tribe forever. Number 10. This is York, the only black man on the famous Lewis and Clark expedition that crossed American territory between 1804 and 1806. What a lot of people don't know is that he was born enslaved, owned by William Clark since childhood. During the journey, the native tribes had never seen a dark-skinned man, and many tried to rub his skin, thinking it was paint. York hunted, explored, and risked his life just like the others. But when he came back, Clark refused to give him his freedom for years. Only after a lot of pushing was he finally freed. He tried to make a living hauling freight, but the business failed. Historians believe he died of cholera around 1832 in St. Louis, basically forgotten. A man who helped map a nation, but one history took centuries to truly recognize. York helped map a nation, and still came home in chains. I put together a few deep-dive dossiers on the Old West stories most people never hear, and left the link in the first comment. If you're not satisfied with the polished, feel-good version of history and want the full picture, this is for you. Number 11. Biddy Mason. Do you know the story of the woman who walked 1,700 miles barefoot behind a Mormon wagon train and ended up becoming one of the richest people in Los Angeles? Biddy Mason was born enslaved in Georgia in 1818 and was forced to cross the country on foot to California, taking care of cattle and children the whole way. When she arrived, she found out slavery was illegal in the state. The problem was, her owner didn't tell her that. Biddy had to go to court on her own to fight for her freedom, and she won in 1856. After that, she worked as a midwife, saved every penny, and started buying land in downtown Los Angeles when the city was still dust and ranches. Those lots became a fortune. She used the money to feed prisoners, found churches, and help families in need. She died in 1891 at 72, owning an empire built from scratch. Number 12. Clara Brown was born enslaved in Virginia in 1800. At 56, when she finally gained her freedom, most people would think about resting. Clara did the opposite. She hit the road for Colorado, right at the peak of the gold rush. She got there without a penny, but with a plan. She washed clothes and cooked for miners, backbreaking work a lot of men couldn't handle. She saved enough money to buy property in Denver. But here's the part that hits hard. She spent almost all of it searching for her family, who had been sold and scattered decades earlier. After years of looking, she found the daughter she thought she'd lost forever. People in Denver called her an angel, not because it sounded nice, but because she really helped whoever needed it. She lived to 85, passing away in October 1885. Number 13. This story sounds like fiction, but it really happened. In 1866, a formerly enslaved woman from Missouri made a choice that could have cost her life. Cathy Williams disguised herself as a man and joined the U.S. Army under the name William Cathay. She became the only documented woman to serve in the Buffalo Soldiers, the famous black regiments that helped expand the West. For 2 years, Cathy marched hundreds of miles, faced the New Mexico desert, and kept her secret from everyone around her. Army doctors examined her several times and never found out. Only when she got seriously sick in 1868 did the truth come out, and she was discharged. After that, she worked as a cook and laundress in Colorado, spending her last years in poverty. She died around 1893 and was almost forgotten by history. Number 14. Louisa Marchbanks was born enslaved in Tennessee in 1833. After the Civil War, she ended up in Wyoming and became one of the most in-demand cooks in the Old West. But here's the interesting part. This woman who started life without freedom ended up cooking for U.S. presidents. That's right, presidents. The miners in Deadwood called her Aunt Lou and lined up to taste her food. She became known not just for her cooking skills, but for feeding anyone who showed up at her door hungry. At a time when formerly enslaved people were fighting to survive, Louisa built a reputation that crossed social classes. She died in March 1911 at 78, after a life few would have imagined possible for someone who started where she did. Number 15. This is Jesse Stahl, one of the best wild horse breakers to ever step into a rodeo arena. Born sometime around 1879, the guy was so good at what he did that the judges just couldn't ignore him. But here's the part that'll make your jaw drop. Even though he completely dominated the competition, the top prizes always went to white cowboys. So, you know what Jesse did? He started riding the meanest horses backward, just to show he was better no matter what. It was a calculated taunt, a way of saying without words that the game was rigged. The man turned humiliation into a silent protest. He traveled across the American West for decades, pulling crowds who paid to see his feats. He died in 1935 at 56, but his story stayed buried for generations. Number 16. Henrietta Stewart. In 1858, a girl was born in Canada who would break barriers many people thought were impossible. Henrietta Stewart not only became a doctor at a time when women could barely vote, but she took her practice to New Mexico, a territory that was still wild and dangerous. Think about it, a black woman treating tough miners and Native American families in the late 1800s. Every day was a battle against prejudice, but her patients didn't care about the color of her skin when they needed medical help. And she was there, ready to treat them. The most impressive part? Henrietta lived until 1951, making it to 93. She watched the world completely change around her, from the wagon era to the first steps of the space age. A whole life dedicated to healing people who often didn't even respect her. Number 17. In 1982, Charlie Sampson made history in a way few people expected. He became the first black man to win a World Rodeo Championship in the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association. Think about it. Rodeo had always been white cowboy territory, a tradition going back to the days of the Wild West. Sampson grew up in Los Angeles, far from ranches, but something about those bulls and wild horses grabbed his attention. The guy broke ribs, got his body banged up over and over, and still kept climbing onto those 2,000-pound animals. Every time he rode, he knew it could be his last. But he didn't stop. His win opened doors that had been closed for more than a century, proving talent and courage don't have a color. Number 18. Ben Hodges was born around 1840 and figured out early on that his biggest weapon wasn't a revolver, but his gift of gab. This black cowboy from Kansas came up with a scheme that worked for decades. He'd pretend to be an Indian to con unsuspecting ranchers. He stole cattle using disguises and made up stories, always getting away before anyone exposed the scam. The most impressive part? He was never arrested for it. The authorities knew who he was, but Hodges always had an alibi or a convincing explanation. He knew the law as well as any lawyer of the time. While other outlaws died young in shootouts, Ben lived quietly until around 1929, dying of old age in Dodge City. The Old West con man proved that sometimes brains beat bullets. Number 19. Willie Kennard took on the Marshal's badge in Yankee Hill, Colorado, at a time when few black men held positions of authority in the West. The town was being terrorized by a gang that ran off any sheriff who showed up. The outlaws themselves, amused by the situation, dared Kennard to take the job, convinced he'd be easy prey. It backfired. Kennard faced the leaders in separate duels and dropped both with deadly accuracy. The gang scattered, and the town finally had peace. What happened after that remains a mystery, since records from the 1880s just stopped mentioning him. Historians still debate whether the stories were exaggerated over the years, but one thing is certain: someone cleaned that town up, and the name that stuck was his. Willie Kennard's story ending in a mystery is exactly how the West gets flattened into half-truths. I put together a few deep-dive dossiers on key frontier figures and left the link in the first comment. If you're the kind of person who hates the shallow version and wants the real grit, it's there for you. Number 20. Addie Huddleston pulled off something few people thought was possible in the Old West. At a time when black people faced brutal barriers in just about everything, she built a real empire in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Huddleston ran brothels and built up a sizable fortune, becoming one of the richest women in the area. What's interesting is that she operated out in the open, paid her taxes, and did business with the local elite. Records show that officials and businessmen visited her places without any major public scandals. In a society that segregated almost everything, money and discretion opened doors that usually stayed shut. Addie died of natural causes in the 1880s, which was rare considering how dangerous the business could be. Her story shows a side of the West that movies rarely show.